Hello everybody, this is Ada Wells, physical therapist, certified Pilates teacher, and what I wanted to do was just talk a little bit and kind of give you guys an idea of some of my feelings about movement and how stress influences movement, and be happy to have a little conversation with anybody who might have questions. Now, the workshop that I was giving was actually a Pilates for Golfers conference, so that just, in and of itself, that's kind of a fun little topic. But kind of on a deeper level, and something that I'm trying to really get through to people, is realizing that what we do for movement is not purely just what we do within our bodies. And what I mean by that, it's not all mechanical. We used to think that it was all about, hey, if you have a muscle that's kind of tight, if you have a muscle that feels like it needs a massage, go massage it, go roll it out. If you had weakness, hey, go do a strength exercise. But the thing is that, it's really more than just, lifting a weight or doing a stretch or just, getting a massage or rolling something on there. We need to think about kind of the other component that keeps getting left out. And that is really the neurological component. That's the brain. And, a lot of people don't realize, and actually I want you to think for a second, for anybody who's ever been in pain, I mean, for the people that are watching, if you've been in pain before, which I'm sure pretty much everybody has, think about how you moved during that time. I mean, were you a smooth mover? Were you limping around? When you're in pain, do you make good decisions? Do you, are you able to, really, utilize, your own brain to the full capacity when you're in pain? And, usually the answer is no. And the thing is that what people don't realize is that stress can impact your movement just as much as pain can. And so we need to be thinking about this when you are doing your exercise programs and thinking about what your mental state is while you're doing it. Now, here's the cool thing. Research shows that, when you do exercise, your stress levels do improve, and that's great. But I think there's also this kind of dark side to that, is that people sometimes, they are very well intentioned with wanting to make sure they, get their run in, they're training for a marathon, they're already in a little bit of a stress state, but almost sometimes doing exercise or doing too much exercise or the wrong type of exercise may contribute to not necessarily helping their brains help what their bodies can do. And so if you're in a stress state, your body is going to move similarly to if it's in a painful state. Now, here's the cool thing with regards to how the brain can impact, these areas we talked about. So like I said, the old way of thinking being, if you are, if you're weak, strengthen it. If you're tight, stretch it. If it feels like it needs a massage, roll it out. Well, what we're finding more is that actually it has much more to do with the compensatory strategies that we do, these rigidity strategies that we hold on to whenever we've had an injury, right? So you have an injury, you move differently. You have some stiffness in some place, so another area decides to help take over. And so the problem is that if you just go in and try to stretch that stiff area, but you're not necessarily addressing why you have that stiffness, then you're missing a lot of the problem. And so what we want to make sure that we do is think about what neurologically might be happening when we're trying to deal with the stiffness and the tightness that we're having. Are we really tight on our upper traps because we are, holding our heads up all day? Well, yeah, that's a lot of it. But we also need to think about, when we're holding our heads forward like that, what else is happening within our body? How are we breathing? If you're stressed out, people that are stressed oftentimes are using the muscles in their neck and not necessarily breathing from the diaphragm. When you're not taking those deep breaths, that's actually affecting how your thoracic spine, how your spine is moving in the ribs, and that's affecting your cardiovascular state, and that's affecting your mental state. And I mean, we can go on and on how it affects the digestive state. And the thing is that really when your body is working well, the brain is also working well with it. So one of the things that I've been trying to do with my patients and my clients is really kind of taking a step back and not necessarily looking at just pure strength. Thanks for the compliment of my posture. But not necessarily looking at pure strength, but actually looking at how we can kind of fill in the blanks of what our brains are not doing at the time when we are stressed, or at the time when we're, moving in patterns that we're not even aware of. One of the things I like to do for people that have issues with regards to posture, what about the Buddhist separation between physical and mental worlds? I'm not a Buddhist, but I think that having time to reflect and be present is very important. When you are meditating, when you are breathing, you actually, it's really tough to think about what's my to-do list when you're thinking about, counting in however many counts to take an inhale in and exhaling and counting those counts out. When you become aware of what's happening in your breath, it's much easier to become aware of what's happening within your own self. So, but oftentimes people don't realize that they're even moving incorrectly. People might think that, oh, I've got pretty good posture, yep, I'm good. And I like to have people experience within their bodies what it feels like to not necessarily move as they should, because they may not realize they're already there. So for example, if you've got tightness in your shoulders, or you might actually elevate your shoulders, not even realize it. I have a lot of people, when I tell them to lift up an arm, I see the shoulder come up into their ear. And that's not necessarily a healthy movement pattern for that upper extremity. So it's nice to be able to, bonjour, it's nice to be able to have a person, do a little shoulder shrug first so they realize this is what the shoulders feel like when they shrug, and then relax. Now, if somebody goes ahead and they lift up, and they're like, well, I have nowhere to go. It's like, well, that's because you're already there, right? So being able to feel that contrast and have that awareness of what we're already doing then makes it easier to be able to take the body and start training it to get out of that bad pattern. Because ultimately, what we do as movement practitioners and physical therapists and all the other, great practitioners that help with movement and fitness, we need to make sure that we're hitting the brain. We need to make sure that we're filling in the blanks. It's kind of like if you've ever gone to a foreign country and you've got your Google Maps and you go to some place that you have never been before, or it's really kind of a less populated place, and you're trying to zoom up and you realize that there is like no street view of this area. And what we need to do when your body has had pain, when your body's had an injury, it's kind of like it shuts off part of that map that's in your head and that's in your brain that helps actually create a more sort of juicy movement for the body. And so we essentially need to kind of work on the Google Maps for our brain to be able to help our bodies function better. And how do we do that? A lot of that is actually putting our body into a relaxed state where we can focus on our breath, we can slow things down. And when you slow things down, you start becoming much more aware of what's happening. So I advocate that we actually get people to slow down, take inventory of what's happening to their bodies before we decide to start throwing in, hey, we got to go walking, we got to move really quickly. Let's take a moment to just give our brains a chance to sort of absorb what's going on, because we may be doing our bodies a disservice by going in and trying to sort of strengthen something when essentially we already have a faulty pattern. So are we doing ourselves a favor by strengthening a faulty movement pattern? Probably not. And so it's a tricky thing. I'm not saying that we shouldn't exercise, but I'm just saying that we need to remember that it's not just pure movement that we need to do, but we also have to think about what our brains are sort of bringing to the table. So when we actually slow things down, take a moment to think about what we are actually doing within the movement. Meditation's the key to all our problem. Yeah, you don't want to go out and hurt anybody when you're meditating, and so I think if the whole world just sort of took a moment to take a deep breath and just sort of take a moment to just be present, there might not be as much violence. But I think a lot of times people are reactive, and that's a normal thing to want to be reactive. But that reactivity is often tied to fear, and fear is not necessarily going to put us in a relaxed state. So if we're fearful because we're hurting, if we're fearful because we're afraid that we're not going to be able to function tomorrow and take our kids to school because we can barely get out of bed to be able to move, that's already affecting the potential that we can actually get ourselves better. So the first place in terms of being able to get ourselves in the right state is to get ourselves in that relaxed state. So that's where breath is so fundamental, breath is so helpful. And like I said, with that, just slowing the movement down, taking inventory of what's happening when you slow the movement down. And honestly, sometimes it's a little tough. If I just have you raise an arm up and you just do it really quick, it's really easy to sort of pass by like I said, the Google Maps of your brain doesn't necessarily register that. We can just really pass by it quickly. But when we go through it a lot slower, and you really pay attention to everything that's happening in your body while you're lifting up that arm, you will become aware of your shoulder. You'll become aware of its connection into the rib cage. You might be aware of what's happening in your core. You might be aware of what's happening in your feet. And as you're doing that, we're filling your brain with information that it can use, information that it starts filling in the blanks, filling in the pictures, so that you're not necessarily just running through and just, ramming everything through your body, but you're actually giving your brain a chance to process. And when your brain can be involved, that's when you can actually start really accessing great movement. And that's when you can actually start layering on, working more on the motor control, working on adding load, working on adding speed. But it starts with slowing everything down. It starts with breath. And, there's no such thing as a bad breather. I mean, my mentor, his name is Brent Anderson, he's from Polestar Pilates, and he says, there's no such thing as a bad breather, because if you're a bad breather, you're basically dead, right? But we can always work to improve how we breathe. And breath, because it is, like I said, tied to so many different systems, is just one of those simple things that if we can just take a moment to take a breath and just sort of take it in and notice what's happening in our body, we're getting at least one step closer to being able to, get ourselves on the road to improvement. Okay, so anyways, that's my little piece for today, and thank you for joining me today. And I am at ProBalance TV. ProBalance.tv is my website. You can go to YouTube. ProBalance TV is my handle. And, on there I have a bunch of, a lot more of just strategies of like, here's a little exercise here, and, and here's a little strategy or a way to do a little self-massage there. But the one thing I don't talk about as much is this mindset and being able to slow it down. So I wanted to make sure that I threw that into the picture so that you really appreciate the importance that has. Okay? We'll see you guys next time.